Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Homecoming Shadows. The desert dust had barely settled from Master Sergeant Joseph Nelson's boots when the process server appeared at his door. 4 tours in Afghanistan, 3 Purple Hearts, and 2 Bronze Stars. None of it prepared him for the papers thrust into his calloused hands. Child support, $10,000 monthly, for twins he'd never seen. Joseph stood in the doorway of his sparse apartment, reading the documents with the same methodical precision he'd once used to disarm IDs. His wife Shelby had filed while he was overseas, claiming their marriage had produced twin boys, now 3 years old. The math was simple. He'd been deployed when these children were supposedly conceived. His phone buzzed. A text from his old unit commander, Colonel Gerald Garrison. "Welcome home, soldier. Heard about the legal troubles. Coffee tomorrow." Joseph's jaw tightened. News traveled fast in military circles. He'd built his reputation on being unbreakable, unmovable, and utterly loyal. But loyalty, he was learning, was a one-way street. The apartment felt alien after 18 months in the mountains of Kandahar. Shelby had redecorated, expensive furniture, high-end electronics, designer clothes scattered across surfaces. On his sergeant's salary, none of this should have been affordable. His wedding photos sat face down on the nightstand, replaced by glamorous selfies of Shelby in places he'd never been. Joseph methodically searched the apartment, his training kicking in. In the bedroom closet, behind designer dresses, he found a shoebox. Inside, hotel receipts, restaurant bills, jewelry he'd never bought her. All dated during his deployments. All signed with 2 names, Shelby Nelson and Alan Reeves. Alan Reeves. Joseph knew that name. City Planning Commissioner, recently appointed to oversee military base housing contracts. A man who'd made his fortune while Joseph bled for his country. The front door opened. Shelby walked in, no longer the sweet small-town girl he'd married 5 years ago. Designer heels clicked against hardwood floors, her blonde hair professionally styled, lips painted crimson. She stopped short seeing him, her blue eyes flashing with something between guilt and defiance. "Joseph." Her voice was different, colder, calculated. "I didn't expect you back so soon." Evidently. He held up the legal papers. "Care to explain?" Shelby lifted her chin, the innocent act dissolving. "You were never here. I had needs. Alan provided what you couldn't: stability, presence, a future, and children. Those boys deserve better than a father who chooses war over family." She moved to the bar cart, pouring herself wine with steady hands. "Alan's been more of a father to them than you ever could be." Joseph studied her like he would an enemy combatant. "Where are they?" "Safe. With their real father." The words hit like shrapnel designed to wound. "Alan's lawyers say you'll pay or face garnishment. Military pension, disability, everything." "I see." Joseph's voice remained level, but his eyes had gone cold, the same look that had preceded every successful mission. "And if I refuse?" Shelby smiled, confident in her victory. "Then you'll learn what happens to deadbeat dads. Alan has connections. Joseph. Judges, politicians, people who matter. You're just a broken soldier with PTSD. Who do you think they'll believe?" She was right about one thing. Joseph was broken, but not in the way she imagined. 4 tours had stripped away everything soft, everything forgiving. What remained was pure predator, honed by years of hunting men through mountain caves and urban hellscapes. "I'll need to see them," he said finally. "The boys." "Absolutely not." Shelby's mask slipped. "Alan won't allow it. Alan doesn't get a vote. I'm still legally their father until proven otherwise." Panic flashed across her features. "Joseph, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Take the deal. Pay the support. We can all move on." But Joseph was already moving, his mind shifting into tactical mode. Court date, next Friday, 10 a.m. Judge Morrison presiding. She seemed relieved by his apparent acceptance. "Just don't fight this, Joseph. You can't win." After she left, to Alan's house, he assumed, Joseph sat in the gathering darkness. Around him, the apartment felt like a forward operating base in enemy territory. which he realized it was. His phone rang. Gerald Garrison. How bad is it, son? They think they're fighting a desperate veteran, Joseph said. They're wrong. What do you need? Everything you can find on Alan Reeves. And Gerald? This stays between us. A pause. Roger that. Joseph? Whatever you're planning is necessary. Joseph ended the call and stared at the photo of Shelby and Alan on the nightstand. In it, they stood before a luxury hotel, her hand resting on the man's chest, both laughing at some private joke. Joseph had killed men for less than what they'd done to him. But death was quick, merciful. What he had planned would last much longer. Chapter 2. Intelligence Gathering. Colonel Gerald Garrison arrived at the coffee shop with a thick manila folder and the grim expression of a man delivering bad news. Joseph sat in the corner booth, positioned to watch all entrances, old habits that had kept him alive in Hellman Province. Alan Reeves, Gerald said, sliding the folder across the table. 42, divorced twice, no kids of his own until now. Built his fortune on military construction contracts, base housing specifically. Joseph flipped through surveillance photos, financial records, property deeds. Gerald's intelligence network was thorough. He's been busy while I was away. Gets worse. Those housing contracts? They're cutting corners. Substandard materials, safety violations covered up. Military families living in conditions that would make a Taliban cave look luxurious. Gerald's jaw worked with suppressed anger. But here's the interesting part. Someone's been feeding him inside information. Someone with access to base engineering reports, inspection schedules, competitive bid information. Someone in uniform. Has to be. The question is who? Gerald studied Joseph's face. What are you thinking? Joseph was thinking about improvised explosive devices. How the smallest component, placed correctly, could bring down an entire building. I need to see these twins. Joseph. They're using children as weapons, Gerald. That crosses a line. Joseph's voice carried the same quiet menace that had once made Taliban fighters surrender rather than face him in close quarters. I need you to arrange a meeting. With Shelby. With Alan Reeves. Gerald looked skeptical. Why would he agree to that? Because I'm going to offer him what every greedy man wants. More money than he can imagine. That afternoon, Joseph drove to the offices of Reeves Development Corporation. The building was new, gleaming glass and steel that screamed of military contract money. The lobby displayed photos of Alan shaking hands with politicians, cutting ribbons at base housing projects, smiling beside uniformed officers. Alan Reeves was everything Joseph expected, soft, manicured, the kind of man who'd never missed a meal or slept in the mud. He wore an expensive suit and an expression of barely concealed smugness as he gestured Joseph into his corner office. Sergeant Nelson, I've heard so much about you. Alan's handshake was weak, his palm damp. Please sit. The office walls were covered with awards, photos, and architectural plans. Joseph's trained eye caught details others might miss. Multiple phones, a safe behind a painting, security cameras positioned to monitor approaches to the building. This man lived in fear despite his confident facade. Understand you've been caring for my wife, Joseph said, settling into the leather chair like a coiled spring. Alan's smile faltered slightly. Shelby is a remarkable woman. She deserves better than being abandoned for years at a time. She deserves security. I respect that. Joseph pulled out a cashier's check, placing it on the desk. $100,000. A gesture of goodwill. Alan's eyes fixed on the check. For what? The boys. I want to establish a relationship with them. Gradually, of course. Under supervised conditions. Joseph leaned forward slightly. I'm not here to fight you, Mr. Reeves. I'm here to make a deal. What kind of deal? I have skills your business could use. Security, consulting, overseas construction projects, navigating military bureaucracy. Joseph gestured at the awards on the wall. You've built an empire on military contracts. I can help you expand it. Alan's greed was almost palpable. What exactly are you proposing? Partnership. I bring you access to classified construction projects, advanced knowledge of contract opportunities, inside information on competing bids. Joseph watched Alan's pupils dilate with avarice. In exchange, I want access to my sons and a reduction in child support obligations. Illegal access to classified information? Alan tried to look shocked, but his voice carried eager undertones. Gray areas. The kind of intelligence gathering that's technically legal but ethically questionable. Joseph shrugged. I spent 4 tours learning how the system really works. That knowledge is valuable. Alan was quiet for several minutes, his businessman's mind calculating possibilities. I need proof of concept, something that demonstrates your capabilities. Joseph had expected this. He pulled out a second folder. Next month's housing contract bids for Fort Braxton. Your competitors' proposals, budget breakdowns, personnel assignments. He opened the folder slightly, letting Alan glimpse the classified stamps. Consider it a down payment. Alan's breathing quickened. How did you? I have friends who trust me. The question is whether you're smart enough to profit from that trust. Joseph closed the folder and stood. I'll need an answer by tomorrow, and I'll need to meet my sons this weekend. As Joseph walked toward the door, Alan called out, the child support will be renegotiated once our partnership proves profitable. Joseph paused at the door. One more thing, Mr. Reeves. I don't forgive betrayal, business or personal. Keep that in mind. Outside the building, Joseph sat in his truck and made 2 phone calls. The first was to Gerald Garrison. It started. The second was to Lieutenant Craig Goldstein, a JAG lawyer who owed Joseph his life from Kandahar. Craig, I need you to file papers on my behalf. Today. What kind of papers? Paternity test for the twins, emergency custody hearing, and fraud charges against Shelby. Joseph watched Alan's office window, seeing the man pacing frantically. Also, I need you to research something for me. What happens to child support obligations when the requesting party is found guilty of identity theft? Joseph, what have you gotten yourself into? Justice, Craig. Old Testament style. That evening, Shelby called, her voice shrill with panic. What did you do? Alan is furious. He says you threatened him. I offered him a business opportunity. He seemed interested. Joseph stood on his apartment balcony, watching the sun set over the city where he'd been born and raised, where he'd married the woman who now saw him as nothing more than a paycheck. Did you tell him about our conversation? Of course I did. We don't keep secrets. Good. Honesty is important in a relationship. Joseph smiled grimly. By the way, I've filed for a paternity test. Court ordered. You'll receive the papers tomorrow. The line went silent. Then, Joseph, please, don't destroy what we've built. Shelby, he said softly, what you built was a lie. I'm just revealing the foundation. After hanging up, Joseph opened his laptop and began typing. The first document was a detailed letter to the FBI's fraud division, outlining suspicious activities in military contract awards. The second was a comprehensive dossier on Alan Reeves' business practices, compiled from Gerald intelligence and Joseph's own observations. But the third document was the most important, a step-by-step plan for the complete destruction of everyone who had betrayed him. He'd learned in Afghanistan that the best operations were the ones where the enemy destroyed themselves. Joseph was simply going to light the fuse. Chapter 3. First Contact. The court-mandated meeting took place at a family services center supervised by a social worker named Johanna Woods. Joseph arrived early, sitting in the sterile waiting room with the same patients he'd once used in Sniper Hides. When Shelby and Alan arrived with the twins, Joseph felt something twist in his chest. The boys were beautiful. Dark hair, serious brown eyes, quiet demeanor that reminded him of himself at that age. They clung to Alan, eyeing Joseph with the wariness of children who'd been told he was dangerous. Boys, this is Joseph, Shelby said, her voice artificially bright. He's a friend. The older twin, Marcus, according to the files, stepped forward with the solemnity of a miniature adult. Are you the soldier man? I am. Joseph knelt to the boy's level, his scarred hands gentle despite their capacity for violence. What else did they tell you about me? That you hurt people for money, the younger twin, Michael, whispered. Joseph's eyes flicked to Alan, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. I protect people. Actually, that's what soldiers do. For the next hour, Joseph played with children who bore no resemblance to him. answered their questions about war with age-appropriate honesty, and felt his rage crystallize into something harder and colder than diamond. These boys weren't pawns in his war with Shelby. They were innocent casualties of her deception. When the session ended, Alan lingered as Shelby gathered the children. "About that business proposition," he said quietly. "Still interested?" "Very. But I need guarantees. Protection." Joseph smiled without warmth. "Mr. Reeves, I spent 4 tours keeping people alive in the world's most dangerous places. I know all about protection." That evening, Joseph received a text message from an unknown number. "The boys love you already. Don't ruin this." It was Shelby, he realized, using a new phone. He responded, "DNA results tomorrow. Then we'll see who's ruining what." The next morning brought 2 pieces of news. First, Craig Goldstein called with the paternity results. "You're not the father, Joseph. Not even close. Want me to file fraud charges?" "Not yet. Let me handle this my way first." The second call was from Gerald Garrison, found your leak. Major Sergio Strickland, Base Engineering Division. Been feeding information to Reeves for 2 years. But here's the twist. He's not doing it for money. Then why? Blackmail. Alan has photos of Strickland with a local prostitute. Turns out she's 17, though she looks older. Strickland didn't know, but try explaining that to a court-martial. Joseph felt the pieces clicking into place. Where's Strickland now? Fort Braxton. Engineering office. Joseph, if you're planning what I think you're planning, I need 24 hours, Gerald. After that, you can arrest everyone involved. Joseph drove to Fort Braxton, using his military ID to access the base. He found Major Strickland hunched over engineering reports in an empty office building, looking like a man carrying the weight of the world. "Sergio," Joseph said, closing the office door behind him. Strickland spun around, his face going pale. "Sergeant Nelson, I heard you were back. I hear you've been busy while I was away, feeding classified information to civilian contractors." Joseph sat down across from Strickland's desk. "How long has Alan Reeves been blackmailing you?" The major's composure cracked. "I don't know what you're talking about." Joseph pulled out his phone, showing Strickland a photo Gerald had provided. The major entering a motel with a young woman. 17, Sergio. Though I'm betting you didn't know that when Alan's photographer captured this moment. Strickland buried his face in his hands. "Jesus Christ. How did you? I make it my business to know who's betraying their oath." Joseph leaned back in his chair. "The question is what you're going to do about it. I can't stop. Alan has other photos, videos. My career, my family. Would all be destroyed if this came out," Joseph finished. "But what if I told you there was a way to end this? To destroy Alan Reeves completely while protecting yourself?" Strickland looked up, hope and desperation warring in his eyes. "Ow!" Joseph smiled, and for the first time in days it was genuine, by giving him exactly what he wants. Over the next hour, Joseph outlined his plan. Strickland would continue feeding information to Alan, but now the intelligence would be carefully crafted by Joseph and Gerald. Fake contract opportunities, false inspection schedules, fabricated competitive bids, all designed to lead Alan deeper into a trap of his own greed. "He'll bid on projects that don't exist," Joseph explained. "Invest in materials for contracts he'll never win. By the time he realizes what's happening, he'll have committed federal fraud on a massive scale. And the blackmail? Handled. Alan Reeves will have bigger problems than compromising photos." Joseph stood to leave. "One more thing, Sergio. After this is over, you're going to resign your commission and disappear. Quietly. Because if I ever see you again, blackmail will be the least of your worries." That night, Joseph called Alan Reeves. "I have something you'll want to see. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Warehouse District, 1247, Industrial Boulevard." "What kind of something?" "The kind that will make you the largest military contractor on the East Coast." Joseph hung up before Alan could respond. Then he called Shelby. DNA results came back. A long pause. "And we need to talk. All 3 of us. Tomorrow night." Joseph gave her the same address. "Bring the boys. They should hear the truth from their real father." "Joseph, please." 8:30, Shelby. "Don't be late." Joseph spent the rest of the evening preparing the warehouse. cameras, recording equipment, and other tools of the trade he'd learned in special operations. By tomorrow night, everything would be in place. The trap would be set, and his enemies would walk willingly into their own destruction. He thought about the twins, Marcus and Michael, and felt a pang of genuine sorrow. They deserved better than the parents they'd been given. But Joseph had learned long ago that innocence was often the first casualty of war. Tomorrow night, Shelby and Alan would learn what happened when you declared war on someone who fought for a living. The revenge was going to be methodical, brutal, and absolutely final. Joseph Nelson didn't believe in second chances. Chapter 4. The Setup. The warehouse in the industrial district had been abandoned for 2 years, its windows dark and loading docks empty. Joseph arrived 3 hours early, transforming the cavernous space into a theater of his own design. Hidden cameras captured every angle, recording equipment hummed quietly in the shadows, and carefully placed lighting would ensure perfect visibility for what was to come. At 7 p.m., Major Strickland arrived as instructed, carrying a briefcase full of fabricated documents. "Are you sure about this, Sergeant?" "In my experience, people destroy themselves," Joseph replied, adjusting a camera angle. "We're just providing the opportunity." Alan Reeves arrived at 8 p.m. sharp, his expensive sedan gleaming under the warehouse's security lights. He entered cautiously, clearly uncomfortable with the surroundings, but driven by greed stronger than his fear. "This is dramatic, even for you," Alan said, his voice echoing in the empty space. Joseph stepped from the shadows, Strickland beside him. "Mr. Reeves, I believe you know Major Strickland." Alan's eyes widened, then narrowed. "What is this?" "Business," Joseph said simply. "The Major has information you'll find extremely valuable." "Sergio." Strickland opened his briefcase with shaking hands. "Fort Braxton is expanding. New housing contracts worth $200 million. The bidding process is rigged. I can guarantee your company wins every contract." Alan's businessman instincts warred with his survival instincts. "And in exchange, 20% of all contract values paid to offshore accounts will provide," Joseph said, "plus guaranteed protection from any military investigations." "This is conspiracy to commit federal fraud," Alan said, but his voice carried excitement rather than concern. "This is opportunity," Joseph corrected, "the kind that comes once in a lifetime." Alan studied the documents Strickland provided, falsified bid specifications, fabricated project timelines, fake budget allocations. To his greedy eyes, they represented a fortune beyond imagination. "I'll need guarantees," Alan said finally. "Protection if something goes wrong." Joseph smiled coldly. "You'll have the protection of everyone involved having too much to lose. Mutual assured destruction, civilian style." At 8:30, headlights swept across the warehouse walls. Shelby's SUV pulled up outside, the twins visible in their car seats. Joseph felt his jaw tighten. Bringing children to this confrontation violated every rule of engagement he'd ever known. Shelby entered alone, leaving the boys in the vehicle. She wore the same confident mask she'd worn in the apartment, but Joseph could see cracks forming around the edges. "Alan," she looked between the 3 men with growing unease. "What's going on?" "Business," Alan said, possessive hands settling on her shoulders. "Your husband is helping us secure our future." "Our future?" Joseph's voice carried Arctic cold. Interesting choice of words. He pulled out the DNA test results, holding them where both Shelby and Alan could see. "These boys aren't mine, Shelby. We both know that. The question is whether Alan knows who their real father is." The color drained from Shelby's face. "Joseph, please." "Please what?" "Please continue paying child support for another man's children. Please ignore the fact that my wife has been committing fraud." Joseph stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. "Or please pretend I don't know about your other secret." Alan frowned. "What secret?" Joseph pulled out a second set of documents. Financial records Gerald had obtained through military intelligence channels. "Your girlfriend has been busy while you two have been playing house. Corporate accounts, property transfers, investment portfolios. All in her name alone." Alan grabbed the papers, his face darkening as he read. "Shelby, what is this?" "I was protecting us," she said quickly. "If something happened to you." "Protecting yourself," Alan snarled. "You've been stealing from me." "Not stealing. Planning." Shelby's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the calculating predator beneath. "You think I'd tie my future to a man who bribes military officers?" "I know what you've been doing, Alan. The substandard housing, the safety violations, the bribes. Did you really think I was too stupid to figure it out?" The warehouse fell silent except for the hum of recording equipment. Joseph watched with professional interest as his enemies turned on each other, exactly as he'd predicted. "You bitch," Alan breathed. "You've been playing me from the beginning." "Just like you played that major," Shelby shot back, gesturing at Strickland. "Did you think I didn't know about the blackmail? About the underage girl?" Joseph felt satisfaction wash over him. Everything was proceeding perfectly. "Gentlemen, lady, perhaps we should discuss the real reason we're here." He activated a wall-mounted monitor, displaying surveillance footage from outside Alan's office building. The timestamp showed earlier that day, FBI agents entering the lobby, federal prosecutors carrying boxes of evidence from Alan's office. "While you two have been arguing, federal investigators have been very busy," Joseph said conversationally. "Seems someone provided them with detailed evidence of bribery, fraud, and conspiracy involving military contracts." Alan went pale. "You son of a bitch. You set us up. I gave you exactly what you wanted, more classified information than you could handle. Unfortunately for you, everything Major Strickland provided was fabricated. False documents, fake contracts, non-existent projects." Joseph's smile was razor-sharp. "But your enthusiastic participation in the conspiracy was very real, very recorded, very illegal." Shelby backed toward the door. "Alan, we need to leave. Now." "Nobody's leaving," Joseph said quietly, and something in his voice stopped her cold. "We haven't discussed the children yet." He gestured toward the SUV outside, where Marcus and Michael sat waiting. "Those boys deserve better than being used as weapons in your schemes. They deserve a father who won't abandon them when federal investigators come calling." "You're not their father," Shelby spat. "No, but I know who is." Joseph pulled out a final document: private investigator reports, DNA analysis, financial records. "Ricardo Santos, construction foreman for Reeves Development. Married man, 3 other children, currently in federal custody for immigration violations." Alan's face went ashen. "Santos? But he's the father of your girlfriend's twins. The man whose false immigration papers you provided in exchange for cheap labor. The man who's now cooperating with federal investigators in exchange for deportation instead of prison." Joseph's voice carried grim satisfaction. Funny how quickly loyalty disappears when federal prosecutors start offering deals. The warehouse erupted in shouting. Alan screaming betrayal at Shelby. Shelby denying everything. Strickland pleading for protection that wouldn't come. Joseph watched the chaos with the detached interest of a predator observing wounded prey. "Enough!" His command voice, honed by years of leading men in combat, cut through the noise like a blade. "You want to know what happens next? I'll tell you." Joseph activated the surveillance equipment, showing them feeds from outside. Federal agents surrounded the building, their vehicles blocking every exit. "Alan, you're going to federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and bribery. Military contractors who steal from soldiers get special treatment in federal facilities. You'll love it." "Shelby, you're facing fraud charges for the fake child support, identity theft for stealing my financial information, and accessory charges for Alan's crimes. The boys will go into foster care while the courts sort out their real parentage. Major Strickland, you're being court-martialed for treason, reduced in rank, and dishonorably discharged. Your pension is forfeit, your benefits revoked." Joseph paused, letting the weight of their destruction settle over them. "But here's the beautiful part. I'm walking away clean. Everything I did was legal, if ethically questionable. Everything you did was federal felony." Shelby's composure finally shattered completely. "Joseph, please. The boys need stability. Don't let them suffer for our mistakes." "Our mistakes?" Joseph's laugh was devoid of humor. "You chose greed over loyalty, betrayal over honor. You used innocent children as weapons against a man who never did anything but love you and serve his country. He moved toward the door, pausing beside Shelby. You wanted to know what happened to the man you married? He died somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, killed by the knowledge that the woman he loved was betraying him while he bled for strangers. What replaced him doesn't forgive, doesn't forget, doesn't take prisoners. As Joseph stepped outside, federal agents moved in. Through the warehouse windows, he could see Alan and Shelby being placed in handcuffs, their shouts of protest echoing across the empty industrial district. Gerald Garrison appeared beside Joseph's truck. Clean work. It's not finished yet, Joseph said, watching as Marcus and Michael were led away by social services. Those boys need a real father, not a deportee or a convict. What are you thinking? Joseph started his truck, his face hard with resolve. I'm thinking it's time for Ricardo Santos to have a very important conversation with federal prosecutors about cooperation, deportation, and permanent severance of parental rights. As he drove away from the warehouse, Joseph felt no satisfaction, no sense of completion. Revenge was a meal best served cold, but it always left him hungry for something else. Something he'd lost in the mountains of Afghanistan and would never get back. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tonight, he had enemies to destroy and innocents to protect. In Joseph Nelson's world, there was rarely a difference between the two. Chapter 5. Federal Complications. The federal courthouse buzzed with activity as Joseph sat in the witness waiting room, reviewing his testimony one final time. 3 weeks had passed since the warehouse confrontation, and the wheels of justice were grinding forward with mechanical precision. Alan Reeves sat in federal detention, unable to make bail on charges that included conspiracy, bribery, and fraud. Shelby had been released pending trial, but faced financial ruin as her assets were frozen by federal seizure orders. U.S. Attorney Marla Schneider entered the waiting room, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes carrying the satisfaction of a prosecutor with an airtight case. Sergeant Nelson, thank you for your cooperation in this matter. Just doing my civic duty, Joseph replied, though both of them knew his motivations ran deeper than patriotism. The defense attorneys will try to paint you as a vengeful ex-husband seeking retribution, Schneider warned. They'll claim you orchestrated this entire operation purely for personal revenge. Joseph's smile was thin. Will they? That seems like a dangerous strategy, considering I'm the primary witness against their clients. Through the courthouse windows, Joseph could see protesters gathering, military families demanding justice for substandard base housing, veterans groups calling for harsher penalties for contract fraud. The case had become a symbol of everything wrong with military privatization, and public opinion strongly favored the prosecution. Craig Goldstein appeared in the doorway, carrying a thick file folder. Joseph, we have a problem. What kind of problem? Ricardo Santos. He's refusing to cooperate with child services regarding parental rights termination. Claims he wants custody of the twins when he's deported to Mexico. Joseph felt cold fury rising in his chest. Explain. Santos thinks he can use the boys as leverage for a better deal with immigration authorities. Stay in the U.S., reduce charges, possible path to citizenship. Craig sat down heavily. Immigration law is complex, but blood relation carries significant weight in custody hearings. Even when the father is a convicted felon facing deportation, even then, the courts prioritize biological parents over all other considerations unless abuse or neglect can be proven. Craig opened his file. Santos has been advised by his attorney that parental rights could be his ticket to remaining in the country. Joseph stood and walked to the window, watching the protesters below. Among them, he noticed several familiar faces, soldiers from his old unit, veterans he'd served with in Afghanistan. They were here to support him, to see justice done. But justice, he was learning, was a complicated concept when children were involved. What about the foster family? Joseph asked. Lou and Carlos Jarvis. Good people, but temporary placement only. They can't adopt while Santos maintains parental rights. Craig hesitated. Joseph, there's something else. Social services is recommending the boys be placed with Santos's extended family in Mexico if he's deported. Absolutely not. Joseph's voice carried the same finality he'd once used to end Taliban negotiations. Those children are American citizens. They stay in America. Then we need Santos to voluntarily terminate his rights. And he's not going to do that unless he gets something in return. Joseph turned from the window, his mind already shifting into tactical mode. Set up a meeting. Santos, his attorney, immigration officials. Today. Joseph, what are you planning? Justice. The kind that actually protects innocents instead of rewarding parasites. 2 hours later, Joseph sat across a steel table from Ricardo Santos in the Federal Detention Center's interview room. Santos was smaller than expected, nervous eyes darting between Joseph, his public defender Paulette Perry, and immigration attorney Gerald Garrison. Joseph had called in every favor to get Gerald appointed to handle Santos's case. Mr. Santos, Joseph began in fluent Spanish. We need to discuss your children. Santos straightened, his machismo asserting itself despite his orange jumpsuit. They're my sons. My blood. Your blood that you abandoned when you chose to work illegally and commit identity fraud. Joseph replied, still in Spanish. Your blood that you never supported, never claimed, never protected. Santos's attorney leaned forward. My client is willing to discuss cooperation in exchange for considerations regarding his immigration status. Joseph switched back to English. Mr. Santos, I'm going to make you an offer. One time only. He pulled out a document packet, meticulously prepared, legally reviewed, tactically devastating. Full voluntary termination of parental rights. Your sons remain in American foster care with possibility of adoption by qualified families. In exchange, Immigration and Customs Enforcement reduces your charges to misdemeanor immigration violations. Time served, voluntary deportation with possibility of legal reentry in 5 years. Santos frowned, clearly struggling with the English. His attorney translated rapidly, her expression growing darker as she read the fine print. This is extortion, Perry said. You're threatening my client with maximum penalties unless he abandons his children. I'm offering your client a choice, Joseph corrected. Accept responsibility for his crimes and make decisions in his children's best interests, or face the full consequences of federal prosecution while his sons grow up in institutional care. Gerald Garrison slid another document across the table. Alternative scenario. Mr. Santos fights deportation and parental rights termination. He loses both, spends 3 years in federal prison, gets deported anyway, and his children remain in permanent foster care because the legal battle prevents adoption proceedings. Santos looked between the documents, the weight of impossible choices evident on his face. What guarantee do I have? You have my word, Joseph said simply, and my word has kept men alive in places where angels fear to tread. Santos's attorney whispered urgently in his ear, but Santos waved her off. In Spanish, he asked Joseph, why do you care what happens to children that aren't yours? Joseph leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of 4 tours and a lifetime of making hard decisions. Because a real man protects innocence even when it costs him everything. Because those boys deserve better than being pawns in adult games. Because someone needs to put their interests first. The room fell silent. Through the reinforced glass windows, Joseph could see federal agents moving through the detention center corridors, processing the endless stream of people who'd gambled with American law and lost. Santos spoke slowly in English. If I sign, my boys stay in America? Get good families. The best families we can find. Educated, stable, loving parents who will raise them as American citizens with American opportunities. Joseph paused. But it has to be your choice, Santos. Not coerced, not forced. Your decision as their father. Santos stared at the termination papers for a long moment. When he looked up, his eyes were wet but resolved. My sons, they deserve better than a father in prison, a father who cannot protect them. He signed the documents with a shaking hand, each signature sealing his fate and freeing his children. When he finished, Santos looked directly at Joseph. You will watch over them? Make sure they are safe. You have my word. As they prepared to leave, Santos's attorney made one final attempt. Ricardo, but giving up everything. Your children, your chance at citizenship, your future in America. Santos stood slowly, dignity intact despite his circumstances. No, I am giving my children their future in America. That is what a father does. Outside the detention center, Gerald Garrison shook his head in amazement. In 20 years of immigration law, I've never seen anything like that. You didn't threaten him, didn't coerce him. You just convinced him to do the right thing. Sometimes the best weapon is the truth, Joseph replied. Santos is a decent man who made bad choices. When given the opportunity to choose his children's welfare over his own interests, he chose correctly. Craig Goldstein was waiting by Joseph's truck with more paperwork. Foster family approval, adoption pre-qualification, family court scheduling. This is moving fast. How fast? If everything goes smoothly, Marcus and Michael could be placed with permanent families within 6 months. Craig studied Joseph's face. What about you? Have you considered applying for custody yourself? Joseph looked back at the detention center, thinking about Santos signing away his parental rights to give his children a better life. I'm not father material, Craig. I'm a soldier. I protect people, I don't raise them. Maybe it's time to learn the difference. As Joseph drove away from the courthouse, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The boys ask about you every day. Foster family says you can visit anytime. J. Woods, Social Services. Joseph stared at the message for a long moment. Marcus and Michael, innocent casualties of adult warfare, now caught between their biological father's sacrifice and their mother's betrayal. They deserved stability, safety, and love. Whether Joseph was capable of providing any of those things remained to be seen. Tomorrow, Shelby and Alan would face their first court appearances. Tomorrow, the media circus would intensify. Tomorrow, justice would continue its slow, grinding advance. But today, 2 little boys were safe, their future secured by their father's sacrifice and their former stepfather's protection. In Joseph's experience, small victories were often the most important ones. The war wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase. Chapter 6, Courtroom Warfare. Judge Morrison's courtroom was packed beyond capacity, spectators spilling into the hallway as the military contracting fraud trial of the decade got underway. Media crews lined the walls, their cameras focused on the defendant's table, where Alan Reeves sat beside his high-powered defense attorney, Cora McGrath, a woman whose reputation for winning impossible cases was exceeded only by her fees. Joseph sat in the witness gallery, his dress blues pristine, his bearing ramrod straight. Around him, other veterans filled the courtroom. Men and women who'd lived in the substandard housing Alan's company had built, who trusted their lives to construction that prioritized profit over safety. U.S. Attorney Marla Schneider rose for opening statements, her voice carrying clearly through the packed courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about betrayal of the highest order. The defendant, Alan Reeves, systematically defrauded the United States military, endangering the lives of service members and their families for personal profit. She gestured toward a display showing photographs of mold-infested military housing, collapsed roofing, and electrical fires. While our soldiers fought overseas, the defendant was waging war on their families at home, providing substandard housing that put children at risk and families in danger. McGrath's response was predictably aggressive. Members of the jury, my client is the victim of an elaborate revenge plot orchestrated by psychologically damaged veteran seeking retribution against his ex-wife. Master Sergeant Joseph Nelson used his military training and connections to frame an innocent businessman, manufacturing evidence and manipulating witnesses to serve his personal vendetta. Joseph felt eyes turning toward him throughout the courtroom. McGrath was playing the only card available to her. Make Joseph the villain and Alan the victim. It was a dangerous strategy, but one that might create reasonable doubt. The first day of testimony focused on the technical aspects of Alan's construction contracts. Structural engineers testified about safety violations. Military housing inspectors detailed cover-ups and falsified reports. The evidence was damning. But Joseph knew the real battle would come when character witnesses took the stand. During the lunch recess, Craig Goldstein pulled Joseph aside. McGrath's bringing in a psychological expert to testify about PTSD and its effects on judgment and behavior. She's going to argue that your entire operation was the product of a damaged psyche seeking revenge. Let her try, Joseph said calmly. My psychological evaluations are part of the military record. 4 tours, 3 Purple Hearts, no psychological disability rating. That's not the point. She doesn't need to prove you're clinically damaged, just that your judgment was compromised by personal motivation. Craig lowered his voice. There's something else. Shelby's agreed to testify for the defense. Joseph felt his blood pressure spike. In exchange for what? Reduced charges on her fraud case. Community service instead of prison time. Craig looked uncomfortable. Joseph, she's going to testify that you threatened her, that you coerced her into the warehouse meeting, that everything was orchestrated to destroy her relationship with Alan. And people will believe her. Grieving wife, mother separated from her children, facing financial ruin? Juries are sympathetic to that narrative. Craig hesitated. Unless we can find a way to discredit her testimony. Joseph smiled grimly. Don't worry about Shelby. I know exactly how to handle her. That afternoon, the prosecution called Major Sergio Strickland to testify. The disgraced officer looked broken as he took the oath, his uniform replaced with civilian clothes, his military bearing collapsed under the weight of his shame. Major Strickland, Schneider began, please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant. Strickland's voice was barely audible. Alan Reeves blackmailed me into providing classified military information. He used photographs of me with a minor to force my cooperation. McGrath objected immediately. Hearsay, Your Honor. The witness is testifying about alleged blackmail that has never been proven. I'll allow it, Judge Morrison ruled. The witness may continue. For the next hour, Strickland detailed 2 years of systematic blackmail, forced cooperation, and military information trafficking. His testimony was devastating, but Joseph could see McGrath preparing her counterattack. Major Strickland, McGrath began her cross-examination. Isn't it true that you're facing court-martial for treason and are testifying here in hopes of receiving a reduced sentence? Yes, ma'am. And isn't it true that your initial contact with my client was facilitated by Master Sergeant Joseph Nelson, who provided you with fabricated information to pass along? Strickland hesitated. Sergeant Nelson told me to continue providing information, but by then... So, Sergeant Nelson was directing your actions? Telling you what information to provide to my client? In the final stages, yes, but... Thank you, Major. No further questions. Joseph watched the jury's faces, seeing doubt creeping in. McGrath was skillfully painting him as the puppet master, manipulating everyone around him for personal revenge. The strategy was working. On the second day, Shelby took the stand. She'd lost weight during the weeks since the warehouse confrontation. Her designer clothes were replaced with conservative attire designed to evoke sympathy. Her performance was masterful. The grieving wife, the protective mother, the woman driven to desperate measures by her husband's abandonment. I never intended to hurt anyone, she testified, tears streaming down her face. I was alone, raising children without support, trying to survive while my husband chose war over family. McGrath guided her through testimony designed to portray Joseph as controlling, manipulative, and vengeful. Did your husband threaten you regarding your relationship with Mr. Reeves? Constantly. He said he would destroy anyone who betrayed him. He said he didn't forgive and didn't forget. Shelby looked directly at Joseph. I was terrified of what he might do. The prosecutor's cross-examination was brutal but careful. Schneider systematically dismantled Shelby's victim narrative, highlighting her financial deception, her fraud schemes, her manipulation of innocent children. Mrs. Nelson, you filed for child support claiming the defendant was the father of your twins, correct? Yes. Despite knowing that your husband was not the biological father. I thought he might be. The timing was unclear. But DNA testing proved definitively that he was not the father, correct? Yes. And you never corrected this filing with the court, even after learning the truth. Shelby's composure began to crack. I was confused, frightened. You were committing fraud to extract money from a man serving his country overseas, weren't you? Objection, McGrath shouted. Sustained, Judge Morrison ruled, but the damage was done. The jury had seen, through Shelby's performance, to the calculating predator beneath. When court recessed for the day, Joseph found himself surrounded by reporters and veterans advocates. The story had captured national attention. The wounded warrior seeking justice against the corrupt contractor and faithless wife. Public opinion was solidly on his side, but jury verdicts weren't determined by public opinion. That evening, Gerald Garrison called with an update on the twins. Marcus and Michael are doing well in foster care. The Jarvis family is interested in permanent adoption if parental rights can be fully terminated. What about Santos? Deported yesterday. Voluntary departure, no contest. His termination of parental rights was processed this morning. Gerald paused. Joseph, social services want to discuss something with you. About the adoption process. What about it? The boys have been asking for you. They want to know when you're coming to see them again. Gerald's voice carried unusual emotion. They've been telling their foster parents that you're their real dad, the one who protects people. Joseph felt something twist in his chest, an emotion he'd thought war had burned out of him years ago. Gerald, I'm not father material. I've killed men with my bare hands. I've done things that would give these boys nightmares. Maybe, but you've also protected them when their biological parents failed them. You fought for their future when everyone else was fighting for themselves. Gerald's voice grew serious. What kind of man does that make you, Joseph? As Joseph hung up the phone, he realized that the war he'd been fighting wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was about protecting innocence from the consequences of adult failures. Marcus and Michael hadn't chosen their parents or their circumstances, but they deserved a future free from the sins of the past. Tomorrow, the defense would present their case. Tomorrow, Alan Reeves would take the stand and try to convince a jury that he was the victim. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. But tonight, Joseph had a decision to make about two little boys who saw him as their protector. The question was whether he was brave enough to be the father they needed, or whether his own demons would make him just another adult who failed them. Some battles, he was learning, were fought not with weapons, but with love. And those were often the hardest wars to win. Chapter 7. The Devil's Testimony. Alan Reeves took the witness stand on the third day of trial, his expensive suit unable to mask the desperation in his eyes. His attorney, Cora McGrath, had coached him extensively, but Joseph could see the telltale signs of a man cracking under pressure. The slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted toward the exit, the sheen of perspiration despite the courtroom's controlled temperature. Mr. Reeves, McGrath began, please tell the jury about your first meeting with Master Sergeant Joseph Nelson. Alan's voice was steady but rehearsed. The sergeant approached me claiming he wanted to establish a relationship with his stepchildren. He offered what appeared to be a legitimate business partnership, security consulting for my construction projects. Did you have any reason to suspect ulterior motives? None at all. He presented himself as a patriotic veteran seeking post-service employment. I wanted to help. Alan looked toward the jury, his expression crafted to convey wounded innocence. I had no idea I was being set up for an elaborate revenge plot. Joseph watched the performance with professional detachment. Alan was good, better than most Taliban commanders he'd interrogated. But like most criminals, Alan's greatest weakness was his inability to resist embellishment. McGrath guided her client through carefully rehearsed testimony. Alan portrayed himself as a successful businessman targeted by an unstable veteran, an innocent man manipulated by a master manipulator with military training in psychological warfare. Did Sergeant Nelson ever threaten you directly? McGrath asked. Constantly. He said he didn't forgive betrayal, that he would destroy anyone who crossed him. He spoke about his combat experience, about hunting men through mountains. Alan's voice carried manufactured fear. I was genuinely afraid for my safety and the safety of my family. U.S. Attorney Marla Schneider's cross-examination began with surgical precision. Mr. Reeves, you testified that you were manipulated into committing federal crimes. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. And these crimes included bribing military officials for classified information? Alan hesitated. I was told the information sharing was legal. Mr. Reeves, I'm going to show you Exhibit 47. Schneider displayed a recording from the warehouse meeting. This is your voice, is it not? Quote, 20% of all contract values paid to offshore accounts. You're clearly discussing bribery here, aren't you? I was confused, frightened. You were negotiating the terms of a criminal conspiracy, weren't you? Schneider's voice carried prosecutorial steel. No one forced you to discuss offshore accounts or percentage payments. Those were your ideas, weren't they? The cross-examination continued for 3 hours, with Schneider systematically dismantling Alan's victim narrative. She presented evidence of his previous construction violations, his pattern of corner cutting, his history of using illegal immigrant labor to maximize profits. Mr. Reeves, how many families were sickened by toxic mold in housing units your company constructed? I don't have exact figures. 47 documented cases, according to base medical records. How many children were hospitalized due to electrical fires caused by substandard wiring in your buildings? Those were isolated incidents. 12 children, Mr. Reeves. 12 children hospitalized because you chose profit over safety. Schneider's voice carried genuine anger now. And you want this jury to believe you're the victim? By the time Schneider finished, Alan looked like a man who'd been run over by a freight train. His carefully constructed facade had crumbled, revealing the greedy, callous individual beneath. During the lunch recess, Craig Goldstein approached Joseph with urgent news. We have a problem. McGrath is calling character witnesses this afternoon. Military officers who will testify about your concerning behavior and vendetta mentality. Which officers? Colonel Kurt Shepard, your former commanding officer from your second tour. Captain Henry Green from the JAG office. Major Philip Mayo from personnel. Craig looked uncomfortable. Joseph, they're going to testify that you have a documented history of refusing to forgive perceived betrayals, that you once pursued disciplinary action against fellow soldiers for minor infractions. Joseph felt cold anger building. They're using my military record against me. It gets worse. They have documentation of the incident in Kandahar, when you refused to authorize medical evacuation for a wounded Afghan interpreter who'd been feeding information to the Taliban. That interpreter got 3 of my men killed. I know, but McGrath is going to argue it shows a pattern of ruthless behavior toward anyone you perceive as a betrayer. Craig hesitated. Joseph, is there anything in your record you haven't told me about? Joseph was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Afghan mountains and Taliban caves, about split-second decisions that meant the difference between survival and death. There are things I did over there that were necessary, but not nice. Things that kept my men alive, but wouldn't play well in a civilian courtroom. Anything McGrath could have discovered. Classified operations, mostly. She shouldn't have access. Joseph paused, but Kurt Shepard was there for most of it. If he's willing to testify against me, he might share details that paint me in an unfavorable light. That afternoon, Colonel Shepard took the stand with obvious reluctance. He was a good soldier caught in an impossible position, testifying against a decorated subordinate in a civilian court. Colonel Shepard, McGrath began, you served with Master Sergeant Nelson in Afghanistan. How would you characterize his attitude toward perceived betrayals? Shepard looked directly at Joseph before answering. The sergeant was uncompromising when it came to loyalty issues. He believed in absolute accountability. Can you give the jury a specific example? There was an incident involving an Afghan interpreter. The man had been providing information to enemy forces, which resulted in casualties among our personnel. When the interpreter was wounded in an attack, Sergeant Nelson refused to authorize medical evacuation. The courtroom stirred. McGrath pressed her advantage. A wounded man was denied medical care, based solely on Sergeant Nelson's judgment. The interpreter had betrayed his oath and gotten American soldiers killed. Sergeant Nelson felt medical resources should be reserved for loyal personnel. Shepard's voice carried reluctant admiration despite his testimony. The decision may have been harsh, but it was tactically sound. Colonel, in your opinion, is Master Sergeant Nelson capable of elaborate revenge plots against those he perceives as betrayers? Shepard met Joseph's eyes again. Sergeant Nelson is the most tactically brilliant soldier I've ever commanded. If he wanted to destroy someone, he would have the skills and knowledge to do so effectively. McGrath smiled, thinking she'd scored a victory. But Schneider's cross-examination revealed the deeper truth. Colonel Shepard, how many times did Master Sergeant Nelson risk his own life to save fellow soldiers? Countless times. He has 3 Purple Hearts and 2 Bronze Stars for heroism under fire. How many men did he bring home alive who wouldn't have survived without his intervention? Dozens. Possibly hundreds if you count the Taliban fighters who surrendered rather than face him in combat. In your opinion, Colonel, is Master Sergeant Nelson a man who protects innocents or targets them? Shepard's answer was immediate and unwavering. Sergeant Nelson has spent his entire career protecting innocents, ma'am. Whatever he did in this situation, I guarantee it was motivated by protecting someone who needed protection. The afternoon continued with other character witnesses, but the damage McGrath hoped to inflict had been largely neutralized. Joseph's military record, rather than painting him as a vengeful sociopath, revealed a man who'd spent his life making hard decisions to protect others. As court recessed for the day, Joseph received a text message that changed everything. It was from Lou Jarvis, the twins' foster father. Marcus asked me to send this. Says it's important. Attached was a child's drawing. Stick figures representing Joseph, Marcus, and Michael standing together. At the bottom, in crayon, Marcus had written, "My real dad, Joseph." Joseph stared at the drawing for a long moment, feeling something fundamental shift inside him. These boys saw him not as a weapon or a soldier, but as a protector, someone who kept them safe when their world fell apart. Craig Goldstein noticed his expression. "Everything okay?" Joseph folded the drawing carefully, placing it in his uniform pocket next to his heart. "Just remembering what I'm fighting for." Tomorrow would bring closing arguments, jury deliberations, and verdicts. Tomorrow would determine whether justice prevailed or whether good men were destroyed by the machinations of those they tried to protect. But tonight, Joseph had a phone call to make. To social services, to discuss adoption procedures and home studies, and all the bureaucratic necessities of becoming the father 2 little boys believed him to be. The war was almost over. It was time to start thinking about peace. Chapter 8. Verdicts and Vengeance. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Joseph spent the time visiting Marcus and Michael at their foster home, watching them play in a backyard while Lou and Carlos Jarvis discussed adoption procedures with social workers. The boys had adapted well to their new environment, but they still asked when Joseph was coming home to stay. Soon, he told them, meaning it for the first time. Very soon, on Friday morning, the jury returned with their verdict. Judge Morrison's courtroom was packed beyond capacity as Alan Reeves stood to hear his fate. The foreman, a retired military veteran named Randy Simons, read the verdict with military precision. On the charge of conspiracy to commit federal fraud, guilty. On the charge of bribery of military officials, guilty. On the charge of wire fraud, guilty. The list continued for 17 separate counts. Alan Reeves had been convicted on every charge. As the verdict was read, his face went ashen, his expensive lawyer's confident facade crumbling. Judge Morrison scheduled sentencing for the following month, but denied bail pending appeal. "Mr. Reeves, you have systematically defrauded the United States military and endangered the lives of service members and their families. You will remain in federal custody until sentencing." As federal marshals led Alan away in shackles, he looked back at Joseph with pure hatred. "This isn't over, Nelson. I have friends, connections. You'll pay for this." Joseph met his stare without flinching. "Mr. Reeves, you just threatened a federal witness in open court. I don't think you understand how much deeper you just made your hole." Outside the courthouse, Reporters swarmed Joseph, but he issued only a brief statement. Justice has been served. Military families can sleep safely knowing that those who prey on our service members will be held accountable. That evening, Craig Goldstein called with Shelby's plea agreement. Guilty to federal fraud charges, 2 years probation, restitution to the military families affected by Allen's housing projects. She'll avoid prison time, but her financial assets remain frozen pending civil litigation. And the twins. Full termination of parental rights. Both biological parents have relinquished all claims. The boys are free for adoption. Craig paused. Joseph, Social Services wants to fast-track your application. The home study, background investigation, psychological evaluation, they're expediting everything. Joseph looked around his sparse apartment, imagining it filled with children's toys and laughter. How fast? If you're serious about this, Marcus and Michael could be home within a month. Home. The word carried weight Joseph hadn't felt in years. Afghanistan had been a mission. The apartment was a temporary quarters. But home was something worth fighting for. 2 weeks later, Joseph stood in Alan Reeves' former office building, now under federal seizure and scheduled for auction. Gerald Garrison had arranged the private viewing as part of the asset forfeiture proceedings. The government will sell everything, Gerald explained as they walked through the empty corridors. Building, equipment, vehicles, even Allen's personal collection of military memorabilia. Joseph paused before a display case containing medals and awards Allen had never earned, uniforms he'd never worn, photos with military officers who trusted him. Stolen valor? Among other things. FBI found an entire room of fake military credentials, forged discharge papers, fraudulent awards. Gerald shook his head. This man wasn't just a criminal. He was a pathological liar who built his entire identity on deception. In Allen's private office, Joseph found something that made his blood run cold. A wall safe, its contents now spread across federal evidence tables, had contained detailed surveillance files on military families. Personal information, financial records, photographs of children playing in base housing that Allen's company had built. He was targeting military families specifically, Joseph realized, not just for fraud, but for potential blackmail, manipulation, identity theft. Gerald nodded grimly. The scope of his operation was far beyond what we initially discovered. Alan Reeves wasn't just stealing from the military. He was preying on military families like a predator. Joseph felt his hands clench in a fist. Even in prison, Allen represented a continuing threat to innocent families. The legal system had delivered justice, but Joseph knew that justice and protection weren't always the same thing. That afternoon brought unexpected news. Alan Reeves had been found dead in his federal holding cell, an apparent suicide. Prison officials reported that he'd used bedsheets to hang himself, leaving behind a note confessing to crimes that went far beyond the charges he'd faced. Joseph received the news from Craig Goldstein with mixed emotions. Seems he couldn't face the prospect of 20 years in federal prison, Craig said. His lawyer says Allen had been receiving death threats from other inmates, military veterans who didn't appreciate his crimes against service families. Any evidence of foul play? None that I've heard about. Federal Bureau of Prisons is conducting a full investigation, but preliminary findings suggest suicide. Craig paused. Joseph, I have to ask, where were you yesterday evening? Home study appointment with Social Services. Lou and Carlos Jarvis were present, along with the caseworker and child psychologist. Joseph's alibi was airtight, which was exactly how he'd planned it. Why? Just covering all bases. With Allen dead, the defense will try to appeal his conviction, claim he was driven to suicide by prosecutorial overreach. Joseph felt satisfaction rather than sympathy. Alan Reeves had gotten off easy. Death was preferable to decades in federal prison, surrounded by the very veterans he'd betrayed. But his death also meant permanent security for the families he might have continued to threaten. That evening, Joseph received a final text message from Shelby. Allen is dead. The boys ask about you every day. Maybe we could work something out, joint custody, visitation rights. I'm still their mother. Joseph's response was immediate and final. You terminated your parental rights voluntarily. The boys have new parents now, people who put their welfare first. Don't contact this number again. Her reply came quickly. You can't keep me from my children forever. Joseph smiled grimly as he typed his response. Watch me. Then he blocked her number and deleted her contact information. Shelby Nelson was now officially part of his past, a closed chapter in a story that was finally moving toward a happy ending. 2 hours later, his doorbell rang. Joseph opened it to find Marcus and Michael standing in the hallway with Lou Jarvis, each boy carrying a small suitcase and wearing expressions of nervous excitement. Surprise! Marcus shouted. We get to come home. Michael hung back shyly until Joseph knelt to his level. Hey, buddy, ready to live with me? Are you going to be our real dad now? Michael asked seriously. If you want me to be, forever and ever. Joseph felt something he'd thought was dead stir in his chest. Hope, love, the possibility of redemption through protecting innocence rather than destroying enemies. Forever and ever, he promised. As the boys explored their new home, Joseph had spent 2 weeks child-proofing and furnishing it. Lou Jarvis pulled him aside. They're good kids, Joseph. Resilient, smart, kind. They've been through hell, but they've come out stronger. Lou smiled. They're lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one, Joseph replied, watching Marcus and Michael claim their bedrooms with the excitement of children finally coming home. That night, after bedtime stories and careful navigation of new routines, Joseph sat on his couch looking at family photos he'd never thought he'd have. Marcus and Michael asleep in their beds, safe and secure for the first time in their young lives. His phone buzzed with a message from Gerald Garrison. Heard the good news about the boys. You did it, Joseph. You protected them. Joseph typed back. We all did. Thank you for everything. What's next for Master Sergeant Joseph Nelson? Joseph looked toward the bedrooms where his sons slept peacefully, no longer worried about adult wars or betrayals or the complexities of a world that had tried to use them as weapons. Teaching 2 boys how to be good men, he typed. Seems like the most important mission I've ever had. Outside, the city hummed with the endless activity of people living their lives, chasing their dreams, making their mistakes. Some would betray those who trusted them. Some would prey on the innocent. Some would choose profit over honor. And when they did, Joseph Nelson would be there, not as a soldier seeking vengeance, but as a father protecting the future his sons would inherit. The war was over. The peace was just beginning. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 6 months later, Joseph stood in the kitchen of his renovated house, packing lunches for Marcus and Michael's first day at their new elementary school. The sparse apartment had been replaced with a real home, bright walls covered with children's artwork, a backyard with a swing set, and bedrooms filled with toys and books and all the detritus of normal childhood. Dad, I can't find my backpack. Marcus called from upstairs, the word Dad still bringing a smile to Joseph's face every time he heard it. Check your closet, buddy, where you left it last night. Michael appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed in his school uniform and ready for the day. The shy, withdrawn child from the foster home had blossomed into a confident 7-year-old who spoke fluent Spanish and helped his father with household repairs. Are you nervous about school? Joseph asked, kneeling to adjust Michael's collar. A little. But Marcus says we stick together like you taught us. That's right. Nelson men protect each other. The adoption had been finalized 3 months earlier in a courthouse ceremony that felt nothing like the legal battles that preceded it. Judge Morrison had presided, and when he'd asked the boys if they wanted Joseph to be their legal father, Marcus had stood up in the witness chair and announced, "He already is our real dad." This just makes it official. Now Joseph was learning the complexities of single parenthood, parent-teacher conferences, soccer practice, bedtime negotiations with children who'd inherited their biological father's stubborn streak and their adoptive father's tactical intelligence. Found it. Marcus thundered down the stairs with his backpack, nearly colliding with Johanna Woods from Social Services, who was making her final home visit. Sorry, Miss Woods, Marcus said politely, his manners improving under Joseph's consistent guidance. No harm done, sweetheart. Johanna watched the morning routine with professional satisfaction. How are you feeling about school? Excited. Dad says education is the most powerful weapon we can carry. Joseph winced slightly at hearing his military philosophy repurposed for child rearing, but Johanna just laughed. Your father is a wise man. After the boys left for school, accompanied by Joseph, who'd taken the morning off to ease their transition, Johanna completed her paperwork at the kitchen table. This is my last required visit, she said, but you should know that Marcus and Michael are lucky boys. You've given them stability, security, and love. They've transformed from traumatized children into confident, happy kids. They did the hard work. I just provided a safe place to heal. Don't minimize your role, Joseph. Not every wounded soldier becomes a nurturing father. You chose to channel your protective instincts into building rather than destroying. After Johanna left, Joseph sat in his empty house, enjoying the rare moment of silence. His phone buzzed with a text from Gerald Garrison. Saw the news about Shelby. Thought you should know. Joseph opened the attached news article. Shelby had been arrested in Nevada for identity theft and welfare fraud, using false names to claim benefits she wasn't entitled to. Her pattern of deception had continued even after losing her children and facing federal probation. Joseph felt no satisfaction from her continued downfall. Shelby had become irrelevant to his life the moment he'd chosen his son's welfare over his desire for revenge. She was someone else's problem now, and her children were safe from her manipulations. His laptop chimed with an incoming video call. Colonel Gerald Garrison's face appeared on screen, his expression carrying the same mixture of pride and concern that had characterized their relationship since Afghanistan. How are you adjusting to civilian life, Sergeant? Learning every day, sir. Turns out raising children requires different skills than hunting Taliban, but there's surprising overlap in the patient's department. Gerald laughed. Any regrets about leaving military service? Joseph considered the question seriously. He'd taken early retirement to focus on the boys, giving up a military career that had defined him for 15 years. None, sir. This is where I'm needed most. The boys are lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one. They saved me as much as I saved them. They discussed mutual friends, former unit members, and the ongoing efforts to improve military family housing standards, a cause that had gained significant momentum following Alan Reeves' conviction and exposure of systemic problems. After the call ended, Joseph walked through his house, noting the changes 6 months of family life had wrought. Children's laughter echoed from the walls. Photos of school events and family outings replaced his military memorabilia. The rigid order of military quarters had given way to the controlled chaos of a home where children were encouraged to be children. At 3 p.m., Joseph was waiting outside the elementary school with other parents, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. When Marcus and Michael burst through the doors, their faces bright with excitement, Joseph felt the familiar surge of fierce protectiveness that had driven every decision since their first meeting. Dad, guess what happened? Marcus reached him first, practically vibrating with energy. Tell me everything. My teacher asked if anyone had family in the military, and I said my dad was a war hero, and she asked me to tell the class about it. And I said you protected people and kept them safe, and everyone thought that was really cool. Michael, always more reserved, simply hugged Joseph's leg and said quietly, I missed you today. I missed you too, buddy. Both of you. As they walked home, the boys chattering about their teachers and classmates and the 100 small dramas of elementary school life, Joseph reflected on the strange journey that had brought them together. He'd begun seeking justice and revenge, motivated by betrayal and wounded pride. But somewhere along the way, the mission had changed from destroying his enemies to protecting innocents. Alan Reeves was dead. Shelby was facing the consequences of her choices. Ricardo Santos had been deported and disappeared into whatever life awaited him in Mexico. The adults who had failed these children were gone, their damage contained and neutralized. But Marcus and Michael remained. No longer weapons in other people's wars, but children with futures bright with possibility. They would grow up knowing they were loved, protected, and valued for themselves rather than what they could provide to others. That evening, after homework and dinner and the endless negotiations of bedtime, Joseph tucked his sons into their beds and read them stories about heroes and adventures and the triumph of good over evil. Simple stories with clear morals. Nothing like the complex realities of adult warfare. "Dad," Marcus said as Joseph was turning off the light, "are you going to stay with us forever?" "Forever and always, son. Nothing will ever change that. Even if we're bad sometimes." Joseph smiled, remembering his own father's unconditional love and the security it had provided through his troubled teenage years. Even then, that's what real fathers do. They love their children no matter what. "Michael was worried you might leave like our first dad did." Joseph looked at Michael, who was pretending to sleep but listening to every word. "Michael, can you hear me?" The boy's eyes opened. "Yes, sir. I'm not going anywhere. This is my home, you're my sons, and we're a family. Families don't abandon each other. Promise?" "I promise." Nelson men keep their word. After the boys fell asleep, Joseph sat on his back porch with a cup of coffee, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. His phone contained dozens of messages from old military buddies, reporters seeking follow-up interviews, and veterans advocates asking him to speak at conferences about military family issues. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, he was simply a father whose children slept safely in their beds, protected from the complexities of a world that had tried to use them as pawns in adult games. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: parent-teacher conferences, soccer games, scraped knees, and hurt feelings, and all the ordinary crises of raising children. There would be no enemy combatants to track, no classified missions to complete, no life-or-death decisions made in split seconds. Instead, there would be homework help and bedtime stories, Christmas mornings and birthday parties, graduations and first dates, and all the milestone moments that defined a childhood well-lived. Joseph Nelson had spent 15 years protecting strangers in foreign lands. Now he would spend the rest of his life protecting the two people who mattered most: his sons, who had chosen him as their father and trusted him with their futures. The war was over. The peace was everything he'd fought for, and more than he'd ever dared hope to deserve. In the distance, a siren wailed as emergency responders rushed to help someone in crisis. Other people's emergencies, other people's wars. Joseph said a brief prayer for their safety and went inside to check on his sleeping children one more time before bed. Marcus and Michael slept peacefully, their faces relaxed and untroubled, their dreams filled with the security that came from knowing they were loved and protected. Joseph stood in their doorway for a long moment, memorizing the scene, his greatest victory, his most important mission accomplished. Tomorrow, the real work would continue. Not the work of a soldier, but the work of a father. And for the first time in his adult life, Master Sergeant Joseph Nelson was exactly where he belonged. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Foundations. Bryant Rayner stood at the window of his modest apartment, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. Once the owner of a thriving construction company and a beautiful suburban home, he now lived in a two-bedroom walk-up that smelled perpetually of the Chinese restaurant downstairs. His calloused hands, still bearing the marks of someone who'd worked his way up from nothing, clenched into fists. 3 months had passed since Melody Rayner had filed for divorce. 3 months of sleeping on a pull-out couch, so his children, Liam, 7, and Aubrey, 5, could have the only bedroom. 3 months of Melody's lawyer insisting that Bryant was an unfit father because he couldn't provide the lifestyle they deserved. The irony cut deep. Bryant had built that lifestyle brick by brick over 15 years, only to have it torn away through a perfect storm of betrayal. "Dad," Liam's voice pulled Bryant from his thoughts. "Are we going to be late for school again?" Bryant turned to his son, forcing a smile. "Not today, champion. Get your sister. We're leaving in 5. As the children gathered their backpacks, Bryant slipped the worn photo from his wallet, the four of them at Liam's 5th birthday, before everything imploded. Before he discovered that Melody had been sleeping with Levi Preston, his business partner of 10 years. Bryant had met Melody waitressing at a diner near his first construction site. He was 22, working 18-hour days to get his fledgling business off the ground. She was 20, putting herself through business school. They'd fallen hard and fast, marrying within a year. For 13 years, they'd been the perfect team, Bryant handling the building, Melody the books. When Levi came on board as a partner, bringing connections to high-end clients, Bryant thought they were unstoppable. Until 6 months ago, when a fire destroyed their warehouse and equipment worth millions. Insurance denied the claim, citing irregularities. Investigations pointed to arson, though nothing was proven. With contracts unfulfilled and lawsuits mounting, Bryant's company collapsed within weeks. Just as bankruptcy loomed, Melody filed for divorce. "Ready, Dad," Aubrey called, her blonde pigtails bouncing as she ran to him. Kissing the top of her head, Bryant pushed away the darkness. His children were all that mattered now. As he drove them to Melody's sprawling new home, purchased somehow despite their financial ruin, Bryant spotted Levi's Porsche in the driveway. The sight of it parked where his truck once stood made bile rise in his throat. "Mom's friend is here again," Liam muttered, his young face hardening in a way that broke Bryant's heart. "Remember what we talked about," Bryant said quietly. "Be respectful, even when it's hard." What he didn't say. Watch everything. Remember everything. Tell me everything. Because Bryant Rayner wasn't just a father fighting for custody. He was a man collecting evidence, piecing together the truth behind his downfall. And somewhere in that house lay answers. Answers his 7-year-old son had just become his unwitting spy to uncover. Chapter 2. Revelations. 3 weeks of custodial visits had yielded little. Bryant sat at his kitchen table, scribbling notes while his lawyer, Diana Cruz, reviewed financial documents. "They're hiding something," Bryant insisted. "The timeline doesn't add up." 3 weeks before the fire, Melody transferred $50,000 to a personal account I never knew existed. Diana sighed. "Suspicious, yes. Proof of criminal activity, no. Without concrete evidence linking Melody or Levi to the arson." "I know my wife," Bryant interrupted. "She calculated every move since college." This wasn't impulsive. Diana leaned forward. "Bryant, the custody hearing is in 2 weeks. Judge Moretti has a reputation for traditional values. If we can't prove Melody's living situation is harmful to the children, she's living with my ex-business partner while still legally married to me. That's not harmful. In today's courts?" "Barely raises an eyebrow," Diana replied. "We need more than moral indignation. Without financial stability on your side." Bryant's phone rang, Melody's number. Answering on speaker, he kept his voice neutral. "Liam's running a fever," Melody said without preamble. "I have an important dinner with Levi's investors. Can you take them tonight?" Bryant caught Diana's eye, who nodded vigorously. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he replied, then hung up. "Perfect opportunity," Diana said. "The children will be more talkative when they're away from her influence." Bryant already had his keys. "Text me if you find anything else in those statements." When Bryant arrived, Melody barely acknowledged him, rushing past in a cocktail dress that probably cost a month of his rent. Levi stood in the background, watching Bryant with barely concealed contempt. "They've both eaten," Melody said, slipping on diamond earrings Bryant had never seen before. "Liam's medicine is in his backpack. I'll pick them up after school tomorrow." "I'll take them to school," Bryant offered. Melody pursed her lips. "Fine, but don't be late again. It reflects poorly on me, I know," Bryant finished. "Your lawyer has made that abundantly clear." Later that night, with Aubrey asleep and Liam drowsy from medicine, Bryant sat on the edge of his son's bed. "How are things at Mom's house, buddy?" he asked casually, smoothing Liam's hair. Liam yawned. "Okay, I guess. She and Mr. Preston argue sometimes when they think we're asleep." "About what?" "Money stuff. And someone named Russo. Mom said he's getting impatient." Bryant kept his expression neutral despite his racing pulse. Vincent Russo was a developer with rumored mob connections, Someone Levi had courted as a client before Bryant vetoed the partnership. Anything else? Liam hesitated. Mom has a special safe in her closet. I saw her put papers in it yesterday. She said if I ever told anyone about it, I'd never see you again. Bryant's blood ran cold. Did you see what the papers were? Liam shook his head, eyes drooping. No, but she types a code to open it. 2-5-8-4. Bryant kissed his son's forehead. You're a good kid, Liam. Get some sleep now. After Liam drifted off, Bryant called Diana. I need you to find everything you can on Vincent Russo, he said quietly. And I think I know where to find her smoking gun. Chapter 3. Infiltration. The weekend custody arrangement gave Bryant 16 hours to execute his plan. He dropped the children at his parents' farm outside the city, then met with a former employee who now worked security. Standard biometrics safe, Mason said, examining the photos Bryant had taken during a bathroom break at Melody's house. If you have the code, you're halfway there. But these newer models often have a secondary fingerprint scan. Can it be bypassed? Mason hesitated. Technically, yes, but we're talking felony breaking and entering. Bryant's expression darkened. They already took everything else. What's left to lose? Late that night, Bryant parked 3 blocks from Melody's house and approached through the wooded area behind the property. Levi's Porsche was gone, at a charity gala, according to Melody's social media. The house was dark except for the porch light. Using the key he'd secretly duplicated from Liam's backpack, Bryant entered through the side door. The alarm panel blinked red. Armed, Bryant punched in the code that had been their anniversary date, holding his breath. The light turned green. Some things never change, he thought grimly. Moving silently through the house, Bryant found the master bedroom, still furnished with pieces he'd handcrafted for their 10th anniversary. The walk-in closet was bigger than his current bedroom, Melody's designer clothes organized meticulously. The safe was hidden behind a panel of shoes. Bryant entered 2-5-8-4, his heart pounding. The digital display flashed green, then prompted for a fingerprint. Bryant pulled out a plastic bag containing a water glass Melody had used during their last custody exchange. Mason had lifted the print and created a silicone replica. Bryant pressed it against the scanner. Access granted. Inside were financial documents, property deeds, and a manila envelope labeled contingency. Bryant photographed everything methodically, his hands steady despite the adrenaline. The last document made his blood run cold. A handwritten agreement between Melody and Levi dated 8 months ago, outlining a plan to eliminate Bryant from the equation and secure company assets before liquidation. Attached was a life insurance policy on Bryant that Melody had taken out without his knowledge. Most damning was a USB drive. Bryant plugged it into his phone with an adapter, finding audio recordings of Melody and Levi discussing the warehouse fire in explicit detail, including their arrangement with an arsonist. We'll be set once the insurance pays out, Melody's voice said. If they investigate too deeply, everything points to Bryant cutting corners. And if he figs it out? Levi asked. He won't, Melody replied. But if he does, well, that's what the policy is for. Accidents happen in construction all the time. Bryant's hands trembled as he copied the files. They hadn't just planned to destroy his business. They considered eliminating him permanently. As he carefully replaced everything and re-sealed the safe, Bryant heard a car in the driveway. Moving swiftly, he exited through the basement window he'd unlocked earlier, disappearing into the darkness as the front door opened. In his car, Bryant called Diana. I've got everything, he said, voice ice cold. All of it. And it's worse than we thought. The hearing is in 4 days, Diana replied. Tell me you didn't break any laws obtaining this evidence. Bryant stared at the house that was once his home, now illuminated by security lights. Let's just say Melody made copies of some very incriminating documents, he answered carefully. And my son found them. Chapter 4. Courtroom Revelation. Judge Evelyn Moretti's courtroom fell silent as Wesley Harmon, Melody's silver-tongued lawyer, delivered his closing argument. Your Honor, the facts speak for themselves, Harmon said, gesturing toward Bryant. Mr. Rayner currently resides in a 2-bedroom apartment in an undesirable neighborhood. He works irregular hours at a construction site and relies on his elderly parents for childcare. Meanwhile, Mrs. Rayner provides a spacious home in an excellent school district with financial stability and consistent routines. Bryant kept his expression neutral, feeling the weight of Liam and Aubrey's future hanging in the balance. Diana Cruz sat beside him, radiating quiet confidence despite Harmon's devastating portrait. Furthermore, Harmon continued, Mr. Rayner's financial collapse raises serious questions about his judgment. The children deserve better than a father who can barely keep a roof over their heads. Judge Moretti's hawkish gaze moved from Harmon to Bryant. Mr. Rayner, do you have anything to add before I deliberate? Bryant started to rise, but Diana placed a restraining hand on his arm. Your Honor, Diana said, standing instead. We've submitted evidence detailing the circumstances of Mr. Rayner's financial situation. As outlined in our brief, there are serious questions about the warehouse fire that destroyed his business. Questions that Mrs. Rayner and her companion, Mr. Preston, have yet to address satisfactorily. Melody shifted uncomfortably while Levi glared from the gallery. Judge Moretti shuffled through papers. I've reviewed your allegations, Ms. Cruz. Without criminal charges, they remain speculative and largely irrelevant to this custody determination. Then perhaps more direct evidence would be pertinent, Diana suggested. We'd like to call a witness. Harmon scoffed. Your Honor, we weren't notified of additional witnesses. This is highly irregular. Who is this witness, Ms. Cruz? Judge Moretti asked. Liam Rayner, Your Honor. The minor child whose custody is at issue. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Moretti frowned. This is unusual, Ms. Cruz. Children's testimony is typically taken in chambers. I understand, Your Honor. However, given the nature of the information, we believe. Absolutely not. Melody interrupted, rising from her seat. I won't allow my son to be manipulated into. Mrs. Rayner, the judge cut in sharply. You'll have your say through counsel. As the adults argued, a small figure stood in the spectators section where Bryant's parents sat with the children. Liam walked determinedly to the gate separating the gallery from the court floor. I want to talk, the 7-year-old announced, his voice silencing the bickering lawyers. I found something important. Judge Moretti's stern expression softened slightly. Young man, this isn't how court procedures work. But it's about the papers in Mom's secret safe, Liam persisted. The ones that say she and Mr. Preston started the fire to hurt Dad's company. The courtroom erupted. Melody went pale, while Levi half rose from his seat before his lawyer yanked him back down. Your Honor, Harmon shouted over the commotion. This is clearly rehearsed testimony. Mr. Rayner has obviously coached the child. Judge Moretti banged her gavel. Order. Everyone sit down. She fixed Melody with a penetrating stare. Mrs. Rayner, do you have a safe in your home? Melody's composure cracked. Of course I do, but that's not. And would your son have knowledge of this safe? He must have been snooping, Melody snapped. Children imagine things. I didn't imagine the recordings, Liam said clearly. I copied them after I saw Mom hide the little computer stick. Bryant hadn't anticipated this. He'd carefully prepared Liam to mention the letter he'd found, the agreement between Melody and Levi, but not the recordings. Somehow, his son had conducted his own intelligence operation. Judge Moretti turned to Liam. Young man, do you have these recordings with you? Liam nodded solemnly, reaching into his pocket and producing a small USB drive, different from the one Bryant had discovered. Grandpa helped me copy it from Mom's computer after I took the other one from her safe. I put that one back like in the spy movies. The courtroom fell silent as the bailiff took the drive and handed it to the judge. Melody's face had drained of all color. Your Honor, Harmon interjected desperately. Whatever that device contains, it was obtained illegally by a minor child. It cannot possibly be admissible. Mr. Harmon, Judge Moretti said coolly, I'll determine admissibility after reviewing the contents. Court is in recess for 1 hour. Mrs. Rayner and Mr. Preston will remain in the building. She fixed them with a steely gaze. I strongly suggest you contact criminal defense attorneys. As the courtroom emptied, Bryant knelt before his son. Liam, why didn't you tell me about the second drive? He asked quietly. The boy's eyes were serious beyond his years. Because Mom said people who knew too much got hurt. I wanted us both to be safe. In that moment, Bryant realized his son hadn't just been a pawn in this game. He'd been a player, watching and calculating just like his father. Chapter 5, Consequences. 1 hour stretched into 3 as Judge Moretti reviewed the evidence in chambers with representatives from the district attorney's office. Bryant waited with the children and his parents in a conference room, while Melody and Levi were sequestered elsewhere with their respective attorneys. Diana entered, her expression cautiously triumphant. They're still reviewing everything, but the recordings are damning, she reported. Melody and Levi discussing not just the arson, but plans to frame you if investigations got too close. There's also evidence they've been systematically draining company accounts for over a year. Bryant absorbed this with cold satisfaction. And custody? Judge Moretti has separated that determination from the criminal matters. But given the circumstances, Diana's smile widened. She's indicated a strong presumption in your favor. When court reconvened, the atmosphere was electric. 2 plainclothes detectives now sat behind the prosecutor's table. Judge Moretti's face was granite as she called the court to order. Based on evidence that has come to light during these proceedings, I am issuing emergency temporary orders, she announced. Full physical and legal custody of Liam and Aubrey Rayner is granted to their father, Bryant Rayner, effective immediately. Bryant exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift from his chest. Furthermore, the judge continued, Mrs. Rayner is to have no contact with the minor children pending criminal investigation into matters revealed today. She turned to the detectives. The court has provided copies of all evidence to law enforcement. You may proceed. The detectives rose. Melody Rayner and Levi Preston, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and arson, one announced. What followed was chaos. Melody screaming that Bryant had set her up, Levi attempting to flee before being tackled by bailiffs, and Harmon desperately trying to negotiate surrender terms. Through it all, Bryant remained seated, one arm around each child, his expression revealing nothing of the savage satisfaction coursing through him. Later, as they prepared to leave the courthouse, Diana pulled Bryant aside. Most men would feel vindicated now, she observed. You don't seem particularly celebratory. Bryant watched his children gathering their things with his parents. This isn't victory, he said quietly. It's just the beginning. Diana studied him. Bryant, you've got custody, and they're facing serious prison time. What more do you want? Bryant's eyes were flat and cold. They planned to kill me, Diana. They destroyed everything I spent 15 years building. They traumatized my children. He buttoned his jacket with deliberate precision. This legal proceeding? It's just round 1. Bryant, Diana warned, whatever you're planning, don't. You've won. Don't throw it away on revenge. Bryant smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm a law-abiding citizen who's been grievously wronged. I'm simply going to ensure justice is fully served. As they left the courthouse, reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Bryant guided his family past them without comment, but paused at the bottom of the steps when one reporter thrust a microphone in his face. Mr. Rayner, how do you feel about your ex-wife's arrest? Bryant looked directly into the camera. Justice is a patient process, he said calmly. And so am I. Chapter 6, Preparation. 3 months after the courtroom revelation, life had achieved a new normal. Bryant had moved the children to a comfortable 3-bedroom house in a safe neighborhood, using money from the insurance settlement finally paid after the arson investigation cleared him of wrongdoing. His construction business was slowly rebuilding, focusing on smaller projects with reliable clients who had stood by him. The children were in therapy, processing their mother's betrayal and subsequent disappearance from their lives. Melody and Levi had both posted bail, Melody using her parents' retirement savings as collateral, Levi through connections that raised questions among investigators. Their criminal trial was still months away. Bryant sat at his kitchen table late one night, reviewing documents Diana had forwarded from the prosecutor's office. The case against Melody and Levi was strong, but not airtight. Both had hired aggressive defense attorneys who were attempting to paint Bryant as the mastermind who framed them after his business failed. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Shipping warehouse on Fletcher St. Midnight. Information about Preston you'll want. Come alone. Bryant stared at the message. It could be a trap, yet his instincts told him otherwise. He called his parents to check on the sleeping children, then drove to the industrial district. The warehouse was dark except for a single light near the loading dock. Bryant approached cautiously, one hand on the legal handgun he now carried. "That won't be necessary," came a voice from the shadows. A man stepped into the light, tall, immaculately dressed, with silver temples and cold eyes. "Vincent Russo. We have mutual acquaintances." Bryant didn't lower his guard. The developer Levi was courting, the one with certain connections. Russo smiled thinly. "I prefer to think of myself as a businessman with diverse interests. Your former partner approached me about financing some projects after your company's unfortunate accident. Why contact me now? Professional courtesy. Preston has been making promises using assets he doesn't control. He's assured certain investors that once his legal troubles are resolved, he'll have access to your insurance settlement and business contracts." Bryant's jaw tightened. "He'll be disappointed." "Yes, well, disappointment can be dangerous in my circles." Russo handed Bryant a flash drive. "Consider this insurance." Preston's been recording his conversations, including with his attorney. Apparently, he doesn't fully trust his paramour either. Bryant pocketed the drive. "Why give me this? Let's just say I prefer dealing with men who honor their commitments. Preston is a liability. You are always the one with actual talent." Russo turned to leave. "Oh, and Bryant? They're planning to offer testimony against each other. Neither is particularly loyal under pressure." After Russo departed, Bryant reviewed the files at home. The recordings confirmed his suspicions. Melody and Levi were already plotting against each other, each planning to claim the other was the mastermind. More valuable were their current schemes. Levi had hidden assets offshore that prosecutors hadn't discovered, while Melody had been contacting relatives about fleeing to a non-extradition country if things went south. Bryant created copies of everything before calling Diana. "I need you to pass something to the prosecutor anonymously," he explained. "And then I need your help with something else, something not strictly legal." "Bryant, they were going to kill me, Diana, and now they're planning to run. The system won't deliver true justice." Silence stretched between them before Diana sighed. "What do you need?" "Access to their electronic accounts, emails, financials, everything. I know you have contacts who can manage that. And if I get that for you?" Bryant's voice was eerily calm. "Then I ensure they destroy each other more thoroughly than the justice system ever could." The next morning, Bryant met with a man Diana had reluctantly connected him with, a cybersecurity expert named Otis who operated in gray areas of the law. "Everything leaves a digital footprint," Otis explained, setting up untraceable equipment in Bryant's garage. "With account credentials, I can create a comprehensive mirror of their digital lives without detection." "How long?" "Give me a week. Then you'll have everything. Emails, texts, financial records, cloud storage." Otis glanced up. "Just remember, knowledge is power, but what you do with it determines whether you're the hero or villain of your story." Bryant's expression remained unchanged. "In my experience, life isn't that black and white." Over the following weeks, Bryant immersed himself in his enemies' digital lives. He discovered Levi's network of shady investors, evidence of previous fraudulent schemes, and, most critically, his plan to double-cross Melody by planting evidence suggesting she had acted alone. Melody's communications revealed her own betrayal in progress. Secret meetings with prosecutors offering testimony against Levi in exchange for leniency, and plans to sue Bryant for defamation once criminal charges were reduced. Neither suspected they were being watched. Neither realized their weapons were being turned against them. Bryant created a secure email account and contacted each of their attorneys separately, anonymously providing evidence of their clients' planned betrayals. He sent select recordings to Levi's shadier investors, revealing plans to implicate them if necessary. To the prosecutors, He anonymously delivered proof of hidden assets and escape plans. "You're playing a dangerous game," Diana warned during a late-night call. "These people have already proven they're willing to commit arson. What happens when they realize someone's systematically dismantling their defenses?" "They'll suspect each other," Bryant replied. "That's the beauty of it. By the time they realize the truth, it'll be too late." As summer turned to fall, Bryant's plan unfolded with meticulous precision. The growing distrust between Melody and Levi became evident in their increasingly hostile court filings. Their legal teams began withdrawing, citing irreconcilable differences with clients. Bryant watched it all with detached satisfaction, compartmentalizing this dark work from his daytime role as devoted father rebuilding a normal life for his children. The final phase of his plan was ready. All that remained was to spring the trap that would ensure neither Melody nor Levi ever threatened his family again. Chapter 7. Entrapment. The exclusive Riverside restaurant was nearly empty at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, exactly as Bryant had planned. Using one of Melody's email accounts, he'd arranged a meeting with Levi, masquerading as her willing to discuss a unified defense strategy. Through Levi's account, he'd sent a similar invitation to Melody. Neither would know the other was coming until it was too late. Bryant sat in a corner booth with clear sight lines to both entrances, nursing a whiskey and checking his watch. The waitstaff had been generously tipped to ensure privacy and specific seating arrangements. Melody arrived first, her designer outfit unable to hide the stress of recent months. She'd lost weight, and her once perfect makeup couldn't conceal the shadows beneath her eyes. She scanned the restaurant anxiously before the hostess directed her to a booth one over from Bryant's, separated by a privacy partition. 15 minutes later, Levi entered, his trademark confidence notably diminished. His Italian suit hung looser on his frame, and his eyes darted nervously around the space before he was seated at a table positioned where neither he nor Melody could see each other from their respective locations. Bryant activated the recording devices he'd planted earlier that morning, disguised as ordinary personal items left at each table. Then he sent identical text messages from burner phones to both targets, running 10 minutes late. "Order a drink. We need to discuss the offshore accounts." Through carefully placed compact mirrors, Bryant watched the color drain from both their faces. Neither left, the mention of offshore accounts too critical to ignore. Another text to Melody. "I know you're planning to testify against me. Smart move, but dangerous. I still have the original plan in your handwriting." To Levi, "The DA has the recordings. You're the sacrificial lamb unless we coordinate our stories." Russo is getting impatient about his investment. Bryant watched their growing panic with cold satisfaction. After sending a final message to each, "Meet me in the private dining room and back," he slipped out a service entrance. From his car parked across the street, Bryant used a directional microphone to monitor what happened next. Melody and Levi, both expecting to meet their accomplice, instead encountered each other in the private dining room. "What the hell are you doing here?" Levi's voice crackled through Bryant's receiver. "Me? You texted me to come." Melody shot back. "I didn't text you anything. You contacted me about offshore accounts." Their confusion quickly escalated to accusations, then to threats, as each believed the other had set them up. "If you're wearing a wire for the DA, I swear to God," Levi growled. "Me? You're the one threatening to implicate me. I saw your emails to your attorney." "What emails?" "I never." Levi stopped suddenly. "Wait, someone's playing us against each other." A moment of silence fell before Melody whispered, "Bryant." Bryant smiled as he started his car. By now, they would be discovering the final element of his setup. An envelope he'd left in a private dining room containing copies of their most incriminating communications, along with a note. "The originals are with people who will release them if anything happens to me or my children. Your move." The next day, Bryant received separate calls from Melody's and Levi's new attorneys, requesting settlement discussions. "They're willing to plead guilty to reduced charges," Diana reported after the meetings. "No trial. No risk of you or Liam having to testify. Melody will relinquish all parental rights in exchange for a more lenient sentence." Levi will make full financial restitution. And if I refuse? Bryant asked, though he already knew the answer. Then they go to trial separately, each planning to blame the other. It would be messy, public, and traumatic for the children. Diana studied him. This is a win, Bryant. Take it. Bryant nodded slowly. Set up the paperwork. But add one condition. Neither can ever contact me or my children again. Any violation means immediate release of everything we have. Diana began to speak, then stopped herself. I never asked where all that additional evidence came from. Bryant's smile didn't reach his eyes. Better that way, isn't it? Chapter 8. Collapse. The plea agreements were signed on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Melody received 5 years with possibility of parole after 3 in exchange for relinquishing all parental rights and providing testimony about Levi's wider financial crimes. Levi got 8 years with no possibility of early release, plus full financial restitution to Bryant's business and additional penalties for the investors he defrauded. Bryant attended neither hearing, sending Diana in his place. He spent the day with Liam and Aubrey at the construction site of what would become their new home, a fresh start built by his own hands. Is Mom really going to jail? Aubrey asked as they watched concrete being poured for the foundation. Bryant knelt to her level. Yes, Princess, for a few years. Because she did bad things with Mr. Preston? That's right. Liam, more aware of the complexities, asked the harder question. Will we ever see her again? Bryant looked his son directly in the eyes. That will be your choice when you're older. For now, we're focusing on our new life. That evening, as the children slept, Bryant received a call from an unknown number. He almost declined it before curiosity won out. Bryant Rayner. You've ruined me. Melody's voice, hollow with defeat. Are you satisfied now? Bryant's grip tightened on the phone. You're violating the no-contact order. What difference does it make? You've taken everything. My freedom, my children, my future. You took those things from yourself, Bryant replied coldly. The moment you decided I was disposable. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she whispered. The fire was Levi's idea. Things just escalated, including the life insurance policy. The one where you benefited if I had an accident. Silence stretched between them. I never would have gone through with that part, Melody finally said. Forgive me if I don't believe you. Bryant's voice remained emotionless. You have nothing I want, Melody. Not explanations, not apologies. Nothing. They're my children too, she pleaded. You can't just erase me from their lives. You did that yourself. Goodbye, Melody. Bryant hung up and immediately called Diana. Melody just contacted me directly. Violation of the agreement. Diana sighed. I'll file the motion in the morning. This means the remaining charges can be reinstated. Good, Bryant said simply. The next week brought news that Melody's sentence had been extended to 10 years with no possibility of early parole. Meanwhile, Levi's offshore accounts were frozen after anonymous tips to financial authorities in 3 countries. Vincent Russo appeared at Bryant's construction site unannounced, watching silently as crews erected steel beams for a new commercial project. Impressive recovery, Russo commented when Bryant approached him. Word is you're expanding faster than before. Bryant shrugged. Quality work speaks for itself. Indeed it does, as does the systematic destruction of one's enemies. Russo smiled thinly. Preston's associates are most distressed about their vanished investments. Financial crimes have consequences, Bryant replied neutrally. So, I've observed. Russo handed him a business card. When you're ready for larger projects, call me. I appreciate a man who can be thorough. That night, Bryant burned the card and deleted the final copies of evidence from his secure drives. The originals remained with his attorney, insurance against any future threats. Within a year, Bryant's construction company had not only recovered, but expanded, building a reputation for both quality and integrity. His children were thriving in their new school, the trauma of their mother's betrayal fading under Bryant's steady guidance. Only in private moments did Bryant allow himself to reflect on the calculated destruction he'd engineered, not with regret, but with the cold satisfaction of a man who had protected what was his and punished those who had tried to take it. Chapter 9. Aftermath. 5 years passed. Bryant's construction company had become one of the largest in the state, known for innovative designs and ethical business practices. The children had adjusted well. Liam, now 12, and showing his father's aptitude for building things. Aubrey, 10, and blossoming into a confident young girl with her father's resilience. Bryant had dated occasionally, but kept relationships casual, unwilling to introduce potential disruption into their hard-won stability. His focus remained on his children and his business, the betrayal a closed chapter he rarely discussed. Until the letter arrived. The prison stationery was unmistakable, as was the handwriting. Bryant nearly discarded it unopened, but something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps a desire for final closure, made him break the seal. Bryant, I'm being released next month. 5 years, just as promised. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, what we lost. The children must be so grown now. Liam would be 12, and Aubrey 10. I know I have no right to ask, but I'd like to see them. Just once. To apologize. To explain that what happened wasn't their fault. They deserve that much, don't they? I'm not the same person who betrayed you. Prison changes you, strips away pretenses. I understand if you hate me forever, but please don't punish them by erasing half their history. Melody. Bryant read the letter twice before calling Diana, now a judge herself. She's really getting out next month? He asked without preamble. Good afternoon to you too, Diana replied dryly. Yes, her release is scheduled. The parole board decided she's been a model prisoner, teaching GED classes, counseling other inmates. Very rehabilitative narrative. And the no-contact order, still in effect regarding you. But regarding the children, Diana paused. Bryant, they're older now. The court might consider allowing supervised visitation if she petitions for it. Bryant's jaw tightened. They haven't asked about her in over 3 years. That doesn't mean they don't think about her. Children are complicated. Diana's voice softened. What are you going to do? That evening, Bryant sat his children down in their comfortable living room. I received a letter from your mother today, he said, watching their faces carefully. She's being released from prison next month. Liam's expression hardened immediately, a mirror of Bryant's own mask. Aubrey looked confused, then curious. She'd like to see you, Bryant continued. That decision is entirely yours. I won't force either of you, and I won't think less of you whatever you decide. I don't want to see her, Liam said immediately. She tried to hurt you. She left us. Bryant nodded, acknowledging his son's loyalty without reinforcing it. Aubrey. The 10-year-old twisted her hands in her lap. I don't really remember her much anymore, she admitted. Just bits and pieces. Would it be bad if I wanted to see what she's like now? No, sweetheart. Not bad at all. Bryant kept his voice neutral despite the conflicting emotions surging through him. The next day, Bryant arranged for a supervised visitation center to manage any potential meeting. He would not be present, could not trust himself to be in the same room as Melody without his carefully constructed control slipping. A week before Melody's release, Bryant received another call, this one from the prison chaplain. Mr. Rayner, I'm afraid I have difficult news. Melody collapsed in the yard yesterday. By the time medical help arrived, she was gone. The preliminary finding is an aneurysm, though the medical examiner is still investigating. Bryant listened in silence, feeling nothing but a hollow emptiness where rage had burned for so long. She asked me to give you a message if anything happened to her, the chaplain continued. She said, tell Bryant he won. Completely. And that I'm sorry. That night, after sharing the news with the children, Aubrey crying, Liam stoic, Bryant sat alone on his deck, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. 5 years of methodical retribution had consumed him, transformed him. He had rebuilt his business, his reputation, his children's security. He had engineered the complete destruction of those who betrayed him. And yet, with Melody's death, he felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only the weight of years spent nurturing vengeance when he could have been healing. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard about Melody. My condolences. That offshore account she never knew about just cleared regulatory scrutiny. Lunch sometime? Levi. Bryant stared at the message, rage rekindling. Levi had clearly